We've got a lot of people trickling in. Thank you guys for joining. We will be kicking it off in just a couple minutes.
Awesome. I see Angela as well. Lots of familiar faces. We have over 50 people that have registered to be here today, which is absolutely wild, Amelia.
Absolutely crazy. I mean, I think we all talked about this, but our goal was really 15. Like, let's teach just a couple people about some of these great strategies, and just overwhelming positive feedback. So very excited to kick this off.
Absolutely. Awesome. We got lots of people rolling in. We're getting up there. Maybe in a couple minutes, like 2-3 minutes, we jump right in, save people the time. People don't need to sit here for too long. They came for the content. They showed up on time. Let's give it to them.
Adam loves that mic.
Always. I hate awkward silence more than anything. Is probably what it is.
Holy D.
I need to be more comfortable with the silence. I need to learn that skill. It's a hard one. I think, Thomas, you're really good at it.
Historically, being the youngest of 7 kids, Paul's laughing as he commutes on the way home because he worked with me for 7 years at one company and 3 before. That is not true, but a lot of meditation has helped.
Yeah, I think I have the opposite problem. I drink a little bit too much coffee, so I speak with a higher cadence and rhythm than I probably should.
Right, got a couple people coming in.
Awesome.
Thank you guys.
Kevin, where's you guys? Oh, maybe you can't unmute, but I like your office. I see the Backyard Ventures sign behind you. It looks very bougie. I got to come visit.
One cool, but thanks, dude. Appreciate it.
Where is it?
Austin.
Oh, Austin. Okay. Yeah. I need to come down to Austin and visit. So that's my last of the 3 major cities of podcasting that I need to come down for a quick little visit. I've been to New York, hoping to go to LA real soon. And then Austin's next on the big agenda.
Woohoo. What a great group. All right. We'll wait 1 more minute, Adam, you think?
Whenever you're ready. You're leading this thing. I'm just here to fill some void.
All right. Let's give people a couple more seconds to join. We will jump in.
Brilliant. Moving everybody down to viewer, and we are pretty much ready to go.
I think we're pretty much ready to go. All right. I'm sure we'll have some people join as we kick things off, but let's dive into everything. Is everybody ready? All right, let me share my screen. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining. We're really excited. Adam, do you mind adding those people as they come in?
I sure can.
All right, great. So thank you again. This is really the first of what will be many webinars led by Podscribe. We are really excited to kick this one off with a super interesting topic. As you guys all saw, we're really going to be talking about how to run cost-effective ad tests using pixel-based attribution. Let's dive into stuff. So I am one of your speakers, Amelia. I am the head of marketing at Podscribe. We have the incredible Adam and the amazing Thomas. Adam, would you just give a brief introduction and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Adam. I'm the VP of Marketing at Adopter Media. We're a predominantly direct response oriented podcast advertising agency. And prior to that, I worked direct at a brand called Fume, helped grow their podcast campaigns from the ground up on a bootstrap budget. And I had to learn some unique strategies along the way to help scale that business. And then prior to that, I was a little humble podcaster running a podcast about coffee and a Japanese skill toy called Kendama. And so I've been in this world on a bunch of different facets and excited to dive in today.
And Adam is representing us from the buyer side, so the brands and the agencies.
And from Canada.
And from Canada. Awesome. And then we have Thomas, the head of growth at GCode. Thomas, can you give us a little introduction?
Yes, I am US based, not from Canada. I have been in some form of audio advertising for over 25 years now, and used to sell live reads for Howard Stern on radio back in the day. Gravitated towards internet radio and was selling internet radio for years, and then been strictly in podcasting for a little over 12 years now.
Amazing. And Thomas is representing us from the buyer, the seller, the publisher and network side. So let's kick it off. First, we'll start off with a little bit about Podscribe. For those of you that aren't familiar, we are hosting this webinar. The goal of these webinars, that this one and more to come, are very content and education focused. Our only goal is to really, help share strategies, highlight some incredible people in the podcast space, and just disseminate learnings across the industry. So this is not a pitch by any means, but just so you know who we are, Podscribe is a third-party independent podcast advertising analytics, verification, planning, attribution tool. We really do the whole gamut. We like to say that we're really trying to step up our game in terms of the podcast advertising app operating system. Really the thing that makes Podscribe unique is that, with attribution, with verification, with planning, with discovery, not only can you see performance, but you can get clear ways to improve it, which is really, really huge. So that's really our bread and butter. And again, this will be it from the Podscribe side of things. We really want to, just share some of these learnings and make this webinar very content focused. So without further ado, let us dive in. So again, how to run cost-effective podcast ad tests. This webinar is really built for both the buyers and the sellers. On the buyer side, as I mentioned, we're going to learn how to test these podcast ads in a very cost-effective manner using pixel-based attribution. And then on the seller side, how can you reframe and repackage these run-of-network buys that have historically been thought of as sort of unsavory, unpopular inventory. So pixel-based attribution. Historically, attribution on the podcast advertising side has really been done through promo codes and vanity URLs. But as we all know, that's really only a piece of the puzzle. Pixel-based attribution for podcast advertising has really come into the space. Recently it's been evolving a lot, but it has, had some huge and made some huge improvements in the advertising space. Just being able to, match back really what these podcast ads are doing and driving in terms of performance. Adam, you guys use pixel-based attribution. Thomas, I know you guys recommend it. Any thoughts on, how this space is evolving from, the pixel side?
Yeah, I think going back in time, there was a day when it was really easy to track performance on just a couple different metrics off of coupon codes or vanity URLs. And then eventually the post-purchase survey came along. But as tech has gotten more complicated, as purchasing behaviors have gotten more complicated, it's nice to add in a third layer that helps to close the gap between what is potential sales and what is real sales and figure out what that gap is. And I think pixel-based attribution has helped close that gap and also brought together the worlds of offline and digital media, where I came from a background that involved a lot of podcast or Facebook ad buying and other forms of ad buying that were very digital forward, where you could get very detailed data on, did this ad convert better than this ad? Did XYZ convert better? And now with pixel-based attribution, you can get a little bit deeper in the layers and make some more conscientious decisions, which has really been what unlocked this whole method that we're going to be talking about is.
Awesome. So what is it? At a high level, and especially from the side of Podscribe, really at the end of the day, we are trying to match the IP of the person who listened to a podcast episode, a podcast ad, with the IP of the person who actually converted on the website. This is done through a bunch of different, technologies. Again, tags on both the, the RSS feed side, the client side, as well as the ad side. If you're interested in learning more and sort of getting a layman's overview of what pixel-based attribution is and how it works, you can check out our guide below. But again, it is definitely an incredible technology that has only been improving and really helping paint the full picture of what podcast advertising brings to the table when it comes to a marketing channel. Adam or Thomas, is there anything else you wanted to add to about pixel-based attribution and why these brands are using it?
I just think it is necessary for the medium to mature and for it to get top Fortune 500 brands into the medium itself. And it's just going to help us grow collectively, both on the sales and the buying side.
Totally agree. All right. So marketing channels. Testing, if you're a marketer, if you're a podcast buyer, if you're anybody, testing is absolutely critical. Where do I buy next? What audience is performing best? How do I know how to measure these KPIs and what I should be measuring them against? You really can't scale without testing. It's absolutely crucial. But at the same time, it can be incredibly hard, especially in the podcast ad space. Adam's going to tell us a little bit why that is so hard.
Well, again, for the context here is coming from a world where Facebook ads were king for a long time. You could get started as any brand with as little as $1 a day or $5 a day to start sampling an audience and then make educated guesses off of what you're seeing on that small limited pool of data to then ramp up into what would be a full-fledged campaign with multiple creatives and flows and funnels, et cetera. But you had to start somewhere in order to get there. And right now, currently, the demand of the industry up until this method was very much come in with big dollars, big spend, get a lot of data, but a lot of it might not have worked very well for you. So it's a lot of risk up front. And then from there, you can scale. But that's a huge investment to ask at a brand. So it was always really expensive, high CPMs, very off-putting to a lot of brands wanting to potentially come into this space that could be perfect for this space. And then on top of that, podcasting has historically been harder to measure. It's hard to determine, well, was that ad actually doing a good job? Was there coupon code leakage, vanity URLs, you name it? There's just a lot of variables to success in this industry that make it hard to get a sample test out to then scale off of, which is what a lot of brands, particularly on the direct response side, are looking for out of a medium that they want to scale through. And last but not least, really, it was this industry had not up until now favored small test budgets. It was always come in with 25K minimums, 50K minimums, 100K minimums. And that limits the types of brands that can come and try out this space. So I think this method will show a doorway to bringing a lot of new brands in that can scale.
Awesome. And that's exactly it. So testing is hard. Podcast testing in particular is hard because of all the things Adam just mentioned. And yet networks and publishers actually have really, really cost-effective inventory that is not only ready for the taking, but ready for the testing. Thomas, why don't you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, I mean, the first reason why these podcasters work with networks is to either monetize their shows, host their content, marketing services, as well as production services. That's basically what that network does. We could provide other things as well. I'm missing the point, am I?
No, you're good. No, you're good. A good overview of networks for sure. But this cost-effective inventory run of network buys.
And a run of network buy at the end of the day could be something that would basically run across all 250 shows if you have 250 shows in your network, or you could create a mini run of network as well.
Awesome. So run of network buys, again, as Thomas was saying, they're really ads that are bought across a network's catalog of shows. And as Thomas said, they can be all the shows. It can be a smaller subset of shows. But there's a couple goods and bads about run of network buys. One, historically really, really low rates. And Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, but CPMs for run of network ads can be anywhere between 65 to 70% lower than premium ads.
Run of network buys are very considerably much lower on a CPM, anywhere from a $5 to $10 CPM. But it allows us to fill the inventory of the long tail. And now that Adam has taught this old dog a new trick, there's a lot more attributions to these run of network buys that historically had a bad name in an up economy because there was no intelligence to it. And it was basically just a waste of money. So now with these third-party attribution tools that are available, they bring some intelligence to a run of network buy with some true data.
Well, and the truth of it is this, is that run of networks are always the second-rate option to anything else that people wanted to do. It was always seen as a budget filler from a brand side where they had some excess spend that they needed to fill some budget. Maybe there was a network that was overall a decent performer that they could maybe put some money towards. And on your end, it was very much a, well, we have extra inventory that we'd like to sell. And it was just to close the gaps, but it was never seen as something that was intentional, that you wanted to do this for a specific reason.
Awesome. And Adam, can you tell us a little bit about why actually measuring run of network performance is difficult?
Well, usually, so on a run of network, most of the time, unless you're doing something very unique where every independent host is doing their own thing as a part of a collective buy, there's some networks, particularly in the sports industry, that do stuff like that, like Locked On. But on the general run a network buy, it's a produced ad where it's one ad that gets laid in over the course of all 250 shows or how many shows you're running on. So there's one code, one link, one everything. So there's no world based on an old methodology to give any sort of attribution to an independent show. So you're just collectivizing that to a broad suite of shows and saying, well, that code did really well or not really well based on the subset of shows that we were on, without a ton of data to work off of.
Absolutely. And what does that set us up for? Let's see. When you use pixel-based attribution to measure show level performance across run-of-network ads, you can really start to create a new framework for lean podcast ad testing and scale. So let's actually just dive in. Again, really, this webinar is for both buyers and sellers. Adam, when we go through this framework on the buyer side, there's a bunch of different benefits of how you can use this pixel-based attribution to do exactly what you just said historically wasn't possible, to not only run across a network of shows, but a bunch of different audiences, but also be able to look at that show's levels performance to then inform future buys. What have you guys seen in terms of the benefits of running these tests?
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk probably a little bit more accurately about some of the data points later, but I can say anecdotally up front, we've had several smaller test campaigns with clients that typically would not be your big spenders in this industry that were able to put in, say, $5,000 into a run a network campaign that then identified winners for them that have since scaled to over 50K campaigns on those particular shows that were leverageable off of what was previously a very small spend. And we'll get very deep into that strategy in a little bit, but it really has allowed the doorway to be open for small brands to test widely, get enough data to make an educated guess, and then ramp up into shows on full scale spends with host read endorsements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. And then on the seller side, Thomas, what are some of the benefits that you guys have seen using this framework?
Sure. It allows us to sell more inventory, basically, whether that's for premium shows or smaller shows. And we get to reframe it and repackage historical unpopular buys like run of network. And one example with Adam that was in real life was I'm working at a new network that a lot of people haven't worked with. So it was a way of basically taking a brand, running across a mini network of our shows, and identifying which ones are reacting to a agency produced spot, and then being able to upsell them. So it definitely reframes and repackages it a little bit. And then Adam brought up Locked On Podcast Network. When I used to sell them 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't as large to be able to do one ad read across all different genres of sports. But this is something that networks, smaller networks, some of them like that are on this call now, that they could utilize to monetize all their shows and identify which ones will work in the future for more of a premium baked-in ad model.
And on top of that, I think this model ultimately benefits the little guy the most. The podcasters that often get overlooked, the podcasts that are new and upcoming on a network that are usually the ones that don't get looked at first by brands because they don't have sponsorship history. They don't have a track record. They're not as well known. But when you run a network on it, you get that folded in. And then all of a sudden you see, oh, you know, Thomas Mancusi's podcast is just absolutely killing it for my brand. We should do a buy on his podcast.
And just to add another point, thank you, Adam. GCode, we have a lot of scripted fiction podcasts that are, episodic, 9 or 10 episodes, and they don't get as much love from the normal DR buyers because of the lack of a host ad read. So we're able to take some branding dollars, whether that's being Sonos or Hendrix, and we're able to sell them not only the new Ad Bluesome show that with Chris Pine and Olivia Wilde that launched a week ago, but we could put a network of unscripted shows together. And now we're monetizing those scripted shows that normally really wouldn't be getting dollars, and now they are. But it also brings data points. So you don't need a code, and they can track the history of who's coming from the podcast to their site.
Awesome. Love it. So, Adam, let's pass it over to you and let's talk on the buyer front. Everything we've just been talking about, what is this actual framework? What is the testing you guys have used? And I know you have some real world examples, and you and Thomas and a couple other networks have really worked really closely on building this out and testing it. So let's dive in on the buyer side to what you guys did.
Awesome. Well, yeah, this really all started as a strategy that came out of a really tough early part of this year. In Q1, Q2, if you were a buyer, it was probably a pretty challenging year in general, and for some brands more than others. And so we felt our backs were up against a wall with finding new shows. Brands were not that keen on testing new things. They were not keen on spending on untested spots. They wanted to know whether or not one of our other clients had tested it first to see if they were willing to jump on it, et cetera, et cetera. So we were in a really tough spot with finding new shows. Inventory was not there for what we were looking for. So I ended up chatting with a couple of our close network partners, trying to find a way to get some testing out that was low risk. And so we formulated a couple strategies with a few early networks like Crossover Media, Realm, Pleasure Podcast, GCode, et cetera, where we went deep into saying, hey, well, let's just do a pre-produced ad. We wanted to isolate the variable of the ad creative. And so we wanted to make sure that it was a pre-produced ad, same code, same everything, that the ad was static itself. Nothing else mattered there. We would then run that ad across a suite of shows, usually with at least targeted demographics and at least knowing that the show's host would likely want to do a host endorsed ad for the product if we scaled up onto doing a host endorsed spot on that show. Because for us, the end goal was not to keep doing pre-produced ads at low CPM. The goal of doing this was to grow it and to find the shows that work and ramp them up into full buys, full scale on those shows, if that makes sense.
And
So
he did it with me, and those shows are now succeeding as well.
Yeah. So we isolate the variables by doing the same ad, running it across a suite of shows. So you run the shows, you aim for about 10 to 20% share of voice on that audience. So if it's a show that typically hits 100,000 impressions, you want at least a sample size of that audience that's big enough to not give you a false negative or a false positive. We found a good benchmark around 20% being an accurate number. So if the show is doing about 100,000 impressions, you want to hit about 10 to 20,000 of that audience over the course of about a month, roughly. And that should give you enough data on it. And we'll talk about where you can see that data and how we look at that data afterwards. So that's step one. You isolate that. And usually this is at a low cost. So for the brand that's looking to buy, this is a really cost mitigated way to test into, say, 100 shows with a $5,000 budget. You could isolate and say about $100, $200, $300 is going towards each of those shows, however you want to spread that out. That's up to negotiation with how you want to work that out with the network and how wide you want to test, et cetera. And then we'll jump into the measurement side. I'll pull up my dashboard here on Podscribe and we'll talk through a dummy account and how we would look at the data and then how I would perceive the data and double down. Amelia, if we're ready, I can by all means share that now, or do you want to jump through a little bit more?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think it's really interesting. Let's just summarize everything you just went through, because it's a lot of material. So, you're isolating, you're testing, you're using pixel-based attribution to measure, because with pixel-based attribution, you're not just measuring all of the performance of, this aggregated, ad. You can actually look at the episodes that performed the best. You can look at the individual shows, which again, as Adam, you were talking about, has historically been really difficult because you had to use the same promo code across all of those ads and you had to use the same vanity URLs. And then you double down. So really, Adam, the goal of this, right, is to run a small budget test across a bunch of these shows. You isolate those variables so that there's nothing else that's going to impact performance that you couldn't see. And then, when you look at these results and you start to look at the data as it comes in, what you're trying to identify is where you should actually be buying and doubling down on the more premium spots.
Yeah, you know what it is? It's like walking into Ben and Jerry's and not knowing what kind of ice cream is going to be the best for you. You go around, you get the little sample stick, you take a little bit here, take a little bit there, you try them and you go, oh man, I really like mint chocolate chip and I really like, this and I really like cookie dough. Now these are all working for me. Let's get a big scoop of each of these now that we've seen that they work at a small scale. Let's ramp that up and make a big old sundae out of it.
I love that. That's such a great one. Honestly, Ben and Jerry's should charge like a couple cents for each of the samples, and we can look at this model. Okay, great. So again, we'll have Adam share his screen and he'll walk through some of the data. But really the goal is to be able to test across a bunch of different audiences and shows, measure those performance at the show level, which again is very unique to what has been possible before. You can also, Adam, get some base level KPIs, right, that you could use to sort of benchmark what future performance would look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we found over the course of our testing, and this is kind of going to lead into where the end goal is that our goal as an agency, we predominantly focus on host read endorsements. That's where all of our clients want to be is they want a host telling their audience how much they love the product that they're advertising. So we would use this to then scale up and ramp up onto those shows. And we would use these key performance indicators to then measure the results of jumping from doing this host read, run a network, or non-host read, sorry, run a network, into a host read. And we could see the performance gaps and jumps to then predict roughly how much more revenue would come through and the rates that would make sense to then buy them at a full scale. We saw theoretically a jump from doing a pre-produced ad where there was no endorsement running on these runner networks to doing a host read endorsement as a faked in or baked in spot on the show, or even as dynamic, a pretty significant jump. When jumping to dynamic, nearly a 50% increase performance jump. So you could justify then again, like a 50% increase on rate. Or if you were jumping to a faked in or host read endorsement that was baked in, it was nearly almost 150 to 200% increase from the pre-produced run a network spot. So huge jumps in performance, huge jumps in overall performance and scale. So we were really able to ramp up campaigns and get those podcasters paid a lot more for the work that they let happen early with the pre-produced reads that then could scale.
That's awesome. And that probably makes media planning and, again, forecasting and stuff so much easier because you actually have, data points that you can use to forecast that stuff out.
And that's on average. That is not a promise to anyone by any means. That is what we saw fairly consistently. There's some shows that obviously did even better or some that did less. So I do want to caveat that by saying that is a generalization of the data that was pulled together.
Awesome. All right, Adam, why don't we share the dashboard and have you walk through some actual results? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So just for everybody to be aware of, this is real data, but no advertisers, no whatever is
all scrambled.
So, yeah, all scrambled, all anonymized, but it is also not fake data. So yeah. This is not
awesome.
HelloFresh.
No, this is just a dummy dashboard. And really, I just want to emphasize both what the inside of a campaign could look like. This is not what a normal run a network campaign would look like or anything, but I do want to highlight where you would look at the data if you were to use Podscribe to measure and perform and how you'd make decisions based off of this. So take, for example, we were running a run of network pre-produced ad across all of these shows here. You would buy your impressions. I'd go to Thomas and say, Thomas, can you sell me all these shows? Let's do a pre-produced read. Let's get that ad placed. And then we would get all these impressions served, say, over the course of a month. And then we would come to the data and we'd say, how do we make decisions based off that data of where we'd want to ramp up and scale up? Now, this normally would be really difficult, but because we isolated the variable of the ad quality, now the number one thing that we are measuring is the quality of the audience itself. Now, in any form of an equation, when you're looking at podcasts, there's three things that matter to whether or not an ad is going to perform or not perform for your client or for your brand, etc. One is going to be the rate. Rates do matter when it comes to making sure a show performs, but that is something that comes down to negotiation, etc. That is almost a variable that is outside of this equation. But the two really controllable factors are, one, the quality of an ad. So how great the host does at selling you on the product, telling you about how much they love their Ember coffee mug or whatever it is that they're pitching to you. And then two, the quality of the audience. No podcast audience is equal to another podcast. Every audience is different, and the influence of a host over that audience is different. If I'm trying to sell a female razor product or a male razor product, etc., it's going to hit differently depending on what that audience is like. So this is the data point we are trying to mine out of doing this, is how good is that audience? So if you can follow along with me on my screen on the right-hand side, you'll see a couple different data points, and I'll highlight them real briefly so you can have awareness here if you've never seen the inside of a Podscribe dashboard. Overall, you have your general performance hierarchy up here, and then down below, you'd have your show-by-show performance, in which you can even drill down into episode-by-episode performance when that loads here in a second. I've also had this dashboard open for a while, so it may not directly populate quickly. So here we go. You would be able to see episode-by-episode data down here, down to revenue, conversions, conversion rate, so and so on. Here's your impressions on audio. Now, it's important to note that this data and this test can really only be done via audio specifically. So if this is a primary YouTube thing that you're doing with YouTube shows, it is less effective, but can still have benefit if you're looking at just the audio side of things. And again, you can't really run dynamic pre-produced campaigns on video anyways. If you're a publisher, you know that. Reach, net new reach, this is in reference to how many new people on that show's audience you're reaching across your suite of campaigns. So for example, if I was running on You're Welcome with Michael Malice and the Doug Stanhope podcast, they are maybe sharing similar audiences to a degree. So you're hitting some of the same people, yada, yada, frequency, so on. Here's where the data gets really good for us. So we want to know, A, how many visitors came to the website from that ad read. And because of the IP matching on, say, the Shopify store of my brand and the podcast that Thomas is selling me, we can match those two up to say this visitor who was listening to Thomas's podcast has now landed on my website. That's one data point. And then the second data point is of those visitors that came from Thomas's podcast that landed on my website, how many of them actually made a purchase? And that's represented by two numbers here. One is your visitor percent. So 1.64% of this show's audience ended up making it to my website, meaning that, okay, you know what? They're pretty intrigued by the product. They're curious. They want to come check it out. They want to see if it's a good fit for them. Secondly, now this is the most important data point, is how likely are they to convert at buying the product when they actually land, or sorry, the visitor conversion percentage. What is the likelihood of them actually buying the product when they land on the website? So if we were to look at these shows, you could see that, well, maybe the Jason Ellis show doesn't have as good of a converting audience as the Michael Malice show. The ad read was the same across both of them, but this show's audience seems to be a better fit for my brand than Jason Ellis's podcast. So on, so on, so on. Because you didn't change the ad creative. The only thing that you're judging is the audience a better audience for your brand. Does that make sense, Amelia? Awesome.
Yeah, I think that makes great sense.
So then we would take this data and then leverage it to then go forward and go, okay, well, knowing now in hindsight the data that we've seen from ramping up these campaigns, the performance typically ends up jumping near 50 to 200% in that ballpark when you switch to host read endorsements. So we've done this. We can assume that maybe this visitor conversion rate, when they're influenced by the advertiser and the host goes, I love my Ember coffee mug. It's like a sous vide for my coffee. I can't go through a single day without drinking coffee from this thing because I'm the chronic person who leaves my coffee sitting on a table and it goes cold after an hour. And then next thing I know, I'm microwaving it and it's just not as good. But Ember leaves it perfect for me. You get that host read endorsement, you get that call to action, you get that coupon code, you get that strong push from a host that has influence over their audience, performance will jump. Almost always. I've almost never seen the inverse where you go from a pre-produced run a network ad to a host read and performance goes down. It just doesn't really happen ever. And if you do ever see that, like something's wrong and you should probably fix something. But nonetheless, you would look at these data points and say, okay, well, can I justify jumping up in spend on this show, going to a host endorsement based on the rates, based on the performance, et cetera, and you can begin to project out where you can go. But we did this effectively by testing sample sizes on each of these shows to find out what the winners were based on our metrics of success, knowing what we needed and we could scale from.
And Adam, he's one of the few people in this industry that will work with publishers, get them on the phone, pull up the Podscribe, and show them the analytics for each of individual show. And that's really how he opened my eyes to this run of network buy. At the time, I thought he was just hooking a brother up and giving me some money because I was at a new job. But after a week or two, or a month, 3 weeks later, he called me. It was 5:15 on a Friday, and we were on a Zoom 15 minutes later, and I was shocked. What he showed me on being able to get all these analytics and to identify, and just the mind that he has to figure out how to use this as a precursor to marry it potentially into baked-in ads.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's just so cool, right? Because Adam, and we'll talk about some of the results, but I'm sure you probably could have looked at the audience data of Burn the Boots, right? And matched it up with the brand that you were going to be running ads for, and it might have looked like it was totally going to be a high performer, right? And you could have used average CPMs and all of that sort of stuff, and then you just really don't know with any of these things, and so this is such a great way to run that small test.
Well, that's the biggest truth of this all, is that so many times in this industry we have had clients come to us saying, well, our target demographic is this, and this. We go, great, awesome. Well, let's target that. And then you maybe get mediocre results. And the next thing you know, we're like, well, we should try this show. And it's a show that is totally out of their realm of like what would normally work. And it just crushes it for them. It has a loyal audience. It just does so good. And that's really hard to prove out to a client until they see some data. Whereas when you run a network like this across 100 shows and they say, wow, this little offshoot podcast, Adam's Little Coffee Podcast, happens to be absolutely amazing for us. And we're a non-caffeinated, product that we're selling. Like we would never have thought this. You can sell these shows and find advertisers for these shows in different ways than you'd ever thought before because of that opportunity that shows up. So absolutely, it's a great opportunity there.
It's amazing. Awesome. Anything else you wanted to share on the dashboard? Adam?
I think that covers most of the things that I would look at from an advertiser's perspective. If Thomas, if there's anything that you think that I know we've had countless conversations about this off webinar. So if there's anything that I normally would talk about when talking through this, is there anything I'm missing?
No, I don't think you're missing everything. I think you did a great job of recapping how you use the tool.
Awesome. Well, I'll end my share screen here. Amelia, do you want to pick back up?
Let's do it. All right. So you guys just sort of got an overview of, the walkthrough of what looking at the data looks like, how, can see some of those and get an initial read on certain shows that might be performing or not performing. Adam, you guys have seen some incredible results from this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we honestly started this with really small budgets with a couple of networks. And at first I felt bad because I was going to these networks saying like, look, I have such little budget to work with here. My brands have pushed me up against a wall. I don't have much to play with, though I want to test because we're at a point where we're running out of options. We're running out of places to go because our brands just were not willing to test too much. So I went to a handful of my favorite networks to work with, people that I trust, people that were willing to go down this process with me, because not everybody was willing to do this because they didn't see the long tail performance that could come out of this and where they could scale these campaigns. So we started with one client originally with about a 5K test that now that campaign in itself directly attributed to using this methodology has now grown to several shows from that original buy. And we have now used that to leverage over to other clients. So that individual show scaled or campaign scaled from 5K to 50K very, very quickly, a profitable spend. And then outside of that, it actually is probably closer to like 300 to 500K annual across multiple brands that have now leveraged that data to then go on to those same shows because of that original run. So if you're an agency buyer, this is an extremely effective method for then finding new shows that other brands could also buy into, even if it's only one brand doing the test originally. There's so many shows that I didn't even know existed, to be honest. And I live in this industry, I breathe this industry, and there's just so much content I am not aware of because there is a new show every day that is hitting the top charts. And then on top of that, like we found tons of new shows that I had never thought of before, several of which Thomas hosts on his network that I didn't even know. One of them has now become one of my favorite shows to listen to. I'm a big outdoors person. I love that one of the shows they work with called Tooth and Claw. It's one of my favorite shows to listen to these days.
And now that I changed the ad structure, he buys the show.
True.
He reached out to me one day. He's driving him out. He's like, I love this show, but why are they playing all the 5 ads at the end, the 85%? I copy and paste what he he was like, I'll buy it if they do that. I copy and pasted what he sent and sent it to the show.
Yeah. And then on top of that, we've also saved our clients lots of money from not buying shows that we thought could have maybe worked. In your example earlier, Amelia, like you can take a run of network data and say, oh man, that show, what we would have normally have thought would have worked for our audience, actually showed up really poorly. And it helps us avoid bad decisions by testing on big shows, because you can do this as a test on shows that are serving 1 million impressions that would normally cost you $20,000 per episode or more. And you can test that show with, say, maybe $1,000 or less to get a little bit of a sample size and mitigate that risk of spending 20K up front. So you can really test into some audiences that way and then scale up to a full buy.
I love that. I mean, and as the economy is changing and all of that, I think this testing strategy is probably even more prevalent than it was when you guys really first started to develop it.
Absolutely.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you, Adam. That was really, really great. Let's dive into the seller side of things. Again, even to the sellers and the networks and the publishers that are here, all of what Adam just walked through is incredibly valuable. And I think will really help, just frame like how a buyer would do this. But from the seller side, again, there's so much opportunity here because as Thomas was mentioning, run of network in particular has been looked at as something that was, just sort of a second thought, right? And it was something that you would do if you needed to fill spots. But I think, with all of this, there is such a huge opportunity for networks, publishers, and these shows to really change that narrative because it can provide a lot of value when you look at utilizing inventory like this. So, Thomas, why don't you just walk through sort of high level, how you guys, again, working with Adam, have seen this change and how maybe it's, perked your guys' ears to, different ways to test and, offer solutions to brands that are maybe a little tentative of spending on podcasting.
Yes, I mean, not to be too repetitive because we did cover this earlier, and it's really basically everything Adam has so beautifully, eloquently stated. It allows the publisher to get more money. It allows us to monetize our long tail. It's a efficient way to do a cost or a test analysis, as Adam said, to go from run of network to big, post ad reads. And it's just no longer that negative a word, right? It's a down economy. Adam going out to selling it to his people. Now that he gave me this knowledge, there's brands out there that do run a network but don't put third-party attribution. They actually spend a lot of money in the space, but now we could provide a service for them, give it to them for free. So at GCode, they have the ability to see exactly on a show level how we perform. So the run of network, the negative association with it is no longer, one, due to the economy, and two, due to the third-party attribution companies out there that are giving some intelligence to those run of network buys.
Amazing. And again, all of this, as you said, Thomas, really wouldn't be possible without pixel-based attribution. Whether you use Podscribe or another pixel-based attribution, provider, it just allows you to look at that data more granularly. And then, on that note too, Thomas, being able to actually provide, value back to the advertiser, be able to share that data and provide some of that transparency. I think the industry as a whole is really, moving towards that direction. I think it's been really difficult, but pixel-based attribution in particular really, really helps facilitate that.
100% agree with you, and yeah, that's it.
All right. And again, just to summarize everything that we were just walking through, really, run of network and everything we just talked about can be an awesome sandbox for low cost ad testing. It's something, and I think Thomas and Adam, you guys will agree with me, it's something that the industry really needs. Again, all these other digital marketing channels, you can start on, some smaller budgets, see that performance and scale up. And podcasting in particular has been really, really difficult. So I just think this is a really, really awesome way, again, with, the changes and the technology that have been evolving in the space, to do some of that low cost testing, and really, really exciting to, just be able to, better anticipate what results are going to be, save money, and, again, continue to grow the podcast space as a whole.
Yeah. I know we're getting close to the end here, and I know we're going to have a Q&A period. So if you do have questions and you're tuning in, please put them in the chat now just to kind of fill up the queue there. But I know we have a little bit more here to go. So I just wanted to prompt people with the opportunity to ask some questions in advance.
Amazing. Yes, great call. So lastly, Thomas,
Yes.
for the publishers and the networks that are here, obviously, now they can start thinking about how they should be pitching this to new brands, right? If the brands are having a hard time with some of those, larger, rates and larger shows and spending, this obviously opens up the opportunity to, again, hey, why don't we just run a small run of network test, for this, and then we can show you the results firsthand, and you can decide whether you want to continue scaling. But I know there's a couple things that networks and publishers need to do in order to make these tests successful. So can you walk us through some of those?
Yeah, I believe creating mini networks and not just doing a total run of network. You have to take some intelligence in your selection of your shows. So if Adam has a particular brand that, needs a household income of 150,000 plus because it costs 3,000 to buy the product, if it's traditionally skews more female than male. So I'll ask him for all that information. I'll create a mini network of shows. And this way, there's a smaller sample size, because if he has a smaller budget, it's only a set amount of impressions that you get to spray across these shows. So you do want that reach and frequency to be palatable so they can make the action of going to the site. Manually capping the frequency is basically, an industry issue when you hear the ad multiple times, but I like to only put it into one position to manually deal with the frequency. So whether that's, and I want it to work, right? So I'm not putting this in a pre or post roll. I'm putting this in an unsold mid-roll piece of inventory. When I say unsold, it's not a baked in ad for me, and I have one slot open on a show and slot 3 or 4, then I get to control the frequency that way. And as far as don't sell as a rotator, what I mean by don't sell as a rotator is simply just don't make it a pre mid-roll rotator, because we all should know what happens in podcasting with the ad systems deliverable. They have a hard time doing a 1x24 tracking pixel. So you don't want the ad to be wasted impressions, be running twice. So those are the 3 things that I believe you could set up the campaign for some success for a run of network mini network buy.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, let's move over to Q&A. I just realized, Adam, I have to do something real quickly. Everybody.
Oh, are they not able to actually
Yeah,
submit
they're
messages?
not able to.
I was like, it's awfully quiet in here.
Yeah, awfully
I swear
quiet.
Paul De Laurentiis would be
That's
spamming
so
messages in here.
all right, you guys should be able to start dropping questions pretty soon. Let's see. Adam, do you just want to give a quick overview summary again of all of this stuff? And
Yeah, I absolutely can. So ultimately on the brand side, I think what is most beneficial here to pick up if you're a brand buyer or an agency buyer is that if you are tight with budget fundamentally, or if you're just looking to find new opportunities to test beyond where you have been testing prior, I think so many of us buyers get caught up in our like, well, these are the shows that work. And so therefore we should keep buying on these shows. That really limits your opportunity as a buyer to grow your portfolio of shows that you work with and grow your impact that you can have at an overall level. So using this methodology, ensuring that you have pixel form attribution tied to it. If you are trying to do this without pixel-based attribution, you're not doing this at all. Like this doesn't make any sense to do because it's one code, one attribution. You're doing it for brand awareness. That's my hot take on it. Sure, you might get performance out of it, but you have no way to double down on know what's working. So that said, this is a really effective way to take small budgets that will become big budgets and big impact at the same time. So hopefully that is enough of a tease there that some people pick this up and start implementing this within their own campaigns. And again, hopefully this gives networks some opportunity to then take this as a strategy, pitch this to brands that are maybe the brands that are not super keen on testing big, that maybe need an easier in, that can go, hey, have you thought about doing this? We can run a small test for you guys at 2,500, 5K, maybe it's 10K, whatever the budget is, you can go through this process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so great. I mean, again, there are a lot of awesome brands and it's only, getting larger, but brands that are starting to get into the podcast space. I mean, the results really are there. And I don't have to, it's share with anybody about, some of the awesome stats that we've seen from the success of podcast advertising. But I think this is such a great way to really pitch it to new brands that are not spending in the space. Because again, that, upfront cost can definitely be significant and is not something that, especially, with, as, brands are just trying to figure out, spending and everything with the economy. I think it's just such a great way to get into the platform and to start testing that out. So cool. Well, I should have added most everybody as a contributor so they can ask questions.
I see some questions rolling in.
Let's do it. Let's just start with Joanna. Or let's start with Christopher. So what target CPMs, flight lengths, and impression loads by show do you recommend to sellers and buyers?
Thomas, do you want to take that? I can highlight like what I would look for from from your perspective.
Yeah, from my perspective, if you're a smaller network or a new network and you only have really one shot to work with these people, I like to just go on a lower CPM because I think a $5 to $10 CPM range is 40 to 50% off a premium spot makes sense, and then the amount of impressions. It depends on that individual show's audience, but I would say you would want to try to hit 25% of that show's potential audience. Adam?
And that would be in a monthly period. And for the podcast networks out there, this is not a long-term strategy to keep doing this and keep selling this inventory. This is not that at all. And so this is really to just run for that brand a limited flight test for them to get some sample data for them to then scale up off of. So this is not they should be buying this every month consistently unless you're running new tests on new shows, etc.
Great point, Adam. Basically, this is, you have a tool belt. This is your fifth or fourth tool in your tool belt, you can say.
Yeah. It's the Ben & Jerry sample, right? You're not going to just only sample. You're going to, figure out which ones you like and then double down from there. Okay, awesome. So let's go to the next question. How do you deal with CPM expectations for podcasters versus brands? And what is the typical take rate or typical take home for the podcasters on run of network?
The run of network would be the same percentage that they would normally get based off of their contract. So it's a preset rev share, and that's varies from each individual show based on their size and that network. So it's hard to say from an individual podcast level what that would be. What was the rest of the question?
How do you deal with those expectations? And then typical take home rate for podcasters on run network. But how do you deal with the CPM expectations for podcasters versus brands?
Overall, and just in the industry, I think it's hard to answer that for run of network. because I don't think they see it. But overall, you have that communication when you start working with the show, right? You explain the nature of podcasting being predominantly direct response and how 5 or 6 agencies who spend a high percentage of the dollars, you only get one shot with. And really, we need to be efficient, because once these agencies see responses, they're hooked like crack. And then we could always raise it later.
Amazing. Okay, great. So Anne has a question. Also assuming you're running the pre-recorded as a dynamic ad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has to be dynamic because it's just the nature of the way it's being delivered. Plus, I can't reach out from a publisher point of view. I can't reach out to an individual show and sell it like that. So it's basically a run-of-network digital ad insertion. No show is baking in the ad read because they're not getting paid for the total audience. So it's siphoning off a percentage of their impressions or listenership and doing it that way.
Yeah, and typically this is done on back catalog. Now, if you have a show at your network that is completely sold out, this is not something you should be doing for that show. This is not intended to be put on your shows that sell like hotcakes. Don't devalue them by doing this. Continue to sell them if they're selling out. However, those shows that are not being sold out, that are not getting those test dollars put on them, this is where this most applies to.
Awesome. All right. And I think the last question that we have, or we have a couple more. Adam, how long can you continue working with the show if you're not seeing a lot of promo codes or vanity URL conversions, but maybe you're happy with the results that you're seeing from Podscribe or pixel-based attribution?
Cool. Yeah, like a bit more of a general question. So you know what? It depends, brand by brand. Sometimes the brands just want certain things and have decisions that they want to make that are even against my own judgment sometimes. And I have to fight up against that regularly. But usually there is a correlation between coupon codes and what you'll see on Podscribe. I think most buyers are pretty familiar with like an idea of a lift calculation, what you see versus coupon codes, what you see versus post-purchase survey versus what you see on pixel-based attribution. In rare cases, are there very vast discrepancies between what comes in on a pixel and what comes in based on a normal ratio on coupon code. So you can kind of ballpark it that way. But if you're seeing like pretty good results on pixel-based attribution and nothing on coupon codes, I'd ask some questions there and just try to figure out what's going on first. But usually I'd want to see a couple promo codes to at least validate, at least at some level.
Awesome. All right. Well, it looks like that's all the questions. Does anybody have any?
Oh yeah, never mind. Heather didn't.
Yeah,
ask
no, Heather, I appreciate.
Thank you, Heather.
Yes, thank you, Heather.
Amazing. All right. So thank you guys for dealing with us with some of these technical things. We're actually beta testing Google Meets as co-host capabilities and stuff. So lots of great learnings from this. Thank you again. I hope this is valuable. We're going to be doing a whole series of these, I think, with a bunch of different industry experts, but really the main goal of this and the future ones is just going to be to provide value and do some of that knowledge sharing that I think a lot of us do on LinkedIn. But so many different insights that everybody is seeing every day. So if anybody has a topic that they would like to see a webinar on, if they would like to be a part of one, we'd love to hear that and hear from you. We'll be sending out not only the slides with the frameworks, the recording will be on YouTube, but we'll follow up with an email with all of the details. And if you have any further questions for Adam and Thomas, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer, to chat and answer those. If you're interested in learning more about Podscribe, feel free to reach out to me and we can get a demo set up. Adam did a great job of just sort of showing the platform. Yeah, really, really great overall. And then Adam, the last thing that I wanted to share is our little
I didn't even know this was in here.
Yeah. For those of you guys that don't know, we recently launched a podcast called Make Better. It is the Podcast Ads podcast. Adam and I every week review real podcast ads. We give feedback, we grade them. We have some amazing guest hosts come on. There's lots of exciting episodes that are going to be coming soon. So I definitely encourage you guys to, give it a listen. We're trying to create the Facebook ad library for podcast ads because I think there's so much value from just, seeing what other brands are doing and actually getting to hear those ads. So, similar to the webinars, if anybody wants to be a host or a guest speaker on Make Better, we'd love to have you. It's been really, really fun and we've got some great feedback so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. And I think all three of us are going to be at Podcast Movement this upcoming week. So if you see us there, please come grab us. Paul wants a picture with you, Thomas, and me, and Amelia. I don't know. But Paul, no pictures. Not for you. Just kidding.
Well,
We'll
you're a
get
celebrity now, Adam, so he needs to.
I don't know about that.
Well, we finished about 3 minutes or 7 minutes early. So once again, thank you, everybody. Let me just make sure there's no last minute questions. No, this was great. So you'll get an email from us with all of the materials, where to watch and listen. But thank you guys again. I mean, really, Adam and Thomas, like our goal was 15 people, and it's just been really, really amazing that we have, we had at one point 47 and 37 of you guys right now. So stay tuned for more of these, lots of awesome things. Please reach out to us, and hopefully we'll see everybody at Podcast Movement soon.
Thank you so much, Amelia.
Bye,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you
Bye,
very much.
everybody.
Thank you, Adam.
Take care.